It's no surprise to me that the first two prominent people pushed out of this administration were women. Let me explain. The conservative women that Trump handpicks, who align themselves with an agenda that controls women, restricting our rights, limiting our autonomy, and pushing us back into this straitjacket of femininity that is only in service of men. There's a familiar pattern here. There's no secure place inside this hand-picked patriarchal body that systemically disrespects, devalues, and discriminates against women and girls. While you're in a perceived position of power in this system that regularly diminishes and devalues other women, even if you help sustain and uplift this system, your power is only temporary. And ultimately, they will come for you. That's the unfortunate truth for all women, regardless of your political affiliation. You might want to wake up and see this for what it truly is.
I think it's time to bring shame back. And not even by making fun of people or saying nasty things about them. In fact, I'm all for shaming people just by having conversations with them politely and conversationally. And in fact, even better, shame people with their own words or their own actions and let them shame themselves. Let's get into this for just a moment. Those clips that we saw were from I believe what they're calling the first partner of California. She's been with Gavin Newsom for several years. But if you're not prepared for conversations or statements like she just went through, it's easy to lose control of conversations because you're dealing with multiple different assumptions. I mean, she went bang, 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 one thing after another, none of it coherent. Each one requiring a different response. Some feminist or anti-male assumptions are statistical. I'll go through three of these. Some are statistical, like the wage gap. Those are based on numbers, studies, and how data are collected or calculated. Some are abstract, like the patriarchy, in which the definition itself is often unclear or constantly shifting. And still others are moral or emotional, like women are oppressed, where the goal is not precision, it's agreement and herd mentality. So it's important to instantly recognize which type of assumption you're up against when people are trying to tell you things like this. If you respond to an emotional claim with statistics, you're going to appear disconnected from the conversation and like you're not knowing what you're talking about. If you respond to a vague system claim with a specific counterexample, it's not going to be very effective. So before you respond, try to recognize what type of claim you're dealing with, because that determines how to respond. The goal is to match the structure of the claim, not the emotions behind it. Here's, I guess, the distinction. If the claim is statistical, stay in analytical structure, such as definitions, data, and variables. If the claim or the assumption, the statement is abstract, like patriarchy, stay conceptual in structure. That includes getting definitions, scope, and meanings. If the assumption or the statement is emotional or moral in nature, stay grounded, again, in structure, clarifying what they mean, what outcome they're pointing to, and anything else along those lines. Let's go through a couple of them. A statistical claim. Women earn less than men, 87 cents. I think that's still the propaganda out there. A response like to that would be something along the lines of, when you say that, are you referring to all overall earnings for the same job within the same hours? What is it that you're comparing here? So what we're doing here is defining the terms, identifying the variables, and forcing the data to be specified without arguing. We're just asking. For a conceptual or abstract claim might be, again, something like, we live in a patriarchy. And an appropriate response here would be, what do you mean specifically by patriarchy in this context? And have them tell you what that means. So you're forcing a definition and narrowing the scope, making the concept concrete. You're getting definite, concrete examples from them or definitions. If it's emotional or moral claims, such as, again, women are oppressed, a good response here would be, what specific situation or outcome are you referring to? Get them to nail it down. Is it education? Is it women in leadership, women in politics? Is it the number of women who own BMWs? What are you talking about? In what way are women oppressed? So what we're doing is, again, not debating feelings, but rather grounding claims and statements in something that's observable and defined. And we can explain a lot of this with schema theory, which explains that our brains use mental shortcuts or schemas to quickly organize and interpret information. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to put everything in a nice little box. So instead of analyzing every statement from scratch, you automatically sort it into familiar categories and respond based on that category. Hope that makes sense. So when someone says something like, women are paid less, your brain might immediately tag it as a debate type claim. So you jump into facts and arguments. So what you're really doing here is interrupting their automatic categorization process. You're taking everything from the little box that they have everything in, and you're saying, you know what? Give me the details on that. And that shift is really important, because once you can match your response to the correct category, then the conversation becomes more clear, controlled, and a hell of a lot harder for the other person to keep vague or slippery. Let's talk a little bit about forcing specificity. A lot of times you'll find that these conversations run on recycled phrases that sound authoritative, like this chick at the beginning of this, but they fall apart the moment we start to ask where their information actually comes from. So instead of jumping in with our own statements like a debate or an argument, make them get specific. Ask where they heard it or what source they're referring to. Listen, this is why I give all of the references in the videos that I make, and I think I get very few comments with people arguing with the content that I actually put out, because I give the sources for everything. So in these examples, ask what the claim is actually based on in a calm, direct way that assumes that there's a real answer behind it. Expect a real answer behind everything that they give. You're curious when you're asking these questions. What happens is they are repeating something that they simply heard from somewhere, sometime, somewhere along the line. So now they repeat it, but they can't explain it. Hell, half the time they don't even remember where they heard it from. So we're forcing the conversation out of vague consensus and into something that can actually be determined and examined. And this can be explained by an illusion of explanatory depth, in which people consistently believe that they understand complex topics far better than they actually do. They've got all these little facts and little particles all over inside their brain, and to them it's cohesive and it makes sense until you start to ask them to explain it all. Right? So when they're asked to explain those topics step by step, their perceived understanding diminishes very quickly, because they realize that they have gaps in their own knowledge and in the way that they explain things. And that's exactly what you're leveraging when you force people to be specific. So again, instead of arguing, just ask simple grounding questions like, where did you hear that? What source are you referring to? What does that actually mean in practice? Ask them those questions and let them stand there, sit there, and let them answer the questions. Right? So instead of trying to prove them wrong, you're creating a situation where they now have to confront how much they actually understand, or more likely don't understand. And in most cases, that does more work than any debate ever could. A lot of times you will not even have to come up with facts, anything like that. Be prepared with them. But a lot of times you won't even have to, because they've already dug themselves in such a deep hole that they're just going to walk away or give up. So let's continue a little bit by talking about narrowing the scope. Vague claims survive by staying broad, right? But the second you pin them down, they start to lose stability. And typically people will, again, as I said, will stop talking to you immediately. So good. Let them disengage and leave it at that. No need to come back with any more dialogue with them. Just let them go. Your job is to try to bring the conversation back to something specific and defined. And if they're not willing to do that, then don't even talk to them. If someone says that we live in a patriarchy, that can mean 10 different things. So you don't argue against the whole concept. Just ask what they mean in very specific context. Are they talking about laws, workplace dynamics, dating, education? What outcome are they pointing to? And what examples are they using? Most of these conversations fall apart because the claim never stays in one place. They'll keep changing the scope of their argument. It starts broad, and then it gets challenged, so they shift from one topic to another, even maybe just slightly, but it's always different. And this is where what we would refer to as moving the goalpost. In fact, people often don't even realize that they're doing it until you try to keep them between those rails, because people will protect a belief that they haven't even clearly defined. That's exactly why it's important to narrow the scope. Keep them on the rails, and between the posts. If someone says we live in a patriarchy, that statement is so broad it can include almost anything. And they're usually cherry-picking topics from one point that get repeated over and over. And when you start asking more questions, they'll change the topic as a way to avoid what you're asking and just keep repeating this process as many times as they change the topic. Now, I also notice a lot of guys that get off track themselves when discussing anti-male rhetoric. They get in an opening in a conversation, and then they start explaining everything they know, trying to win an argument or a debate or to change somebody's mind all at once. But the moment you switch into long explanations, you give control back to people. And now you're the one talking, and they can just wait for a chance to dismiss or to pivot on you. So instead, stick with questions with short, direct follow-ups that keep the pressure on without getting into a debate. In fact, as I said, most women will give up very quickly because they don't have answers for you, and it's uncomfortable for them to keep digging themselves into holes. But talking too much is where a lot of guys, as I mentioned, lose an advantage that they've just created. But most of all, let them do the talking. Shut your mouth, ask questions, and that's it. Let them clarify, backtrack, or contradict themselves. Give them the rope and just stand there looking at them and asking more questions and more specific questions for more details. And when you do this right, you don't need a big conclusion. So that's why we all want to stay in conversations that force responses before moving on to other topics. Do not let them off the hook. As I mentioned many times, you won't even have to say anything. Just keep asking questions until they give up and leave. Let them shame themselves. I'd love to know your comments on this one. So tell me what you think, and I'll see y'all soon.